The sand of the Colosseum floor is already dark with blood when they drag her out at noon. Her name is Aurelia Tertia, and she is 23 years old, a freed woman accused of poisoning her former master's wife, though she has maintained her innocence through 3 days of preliminary torture that have left her unable to walk without assistance. The guards who hold her arms are not gentle. They do not need to be. The 50,000 Romans filling the seats above are finishing their midday meals, chatting with neighbors, barely glancing at the arena floor where the morning's animal hunts have concluded and the afternoon's gladiatorial matches have not yet begun. This hour belongs to the condemned. Aurelia can feel the heat of the sand through the thin shift they have left her, her only garment already torn from the handling. She can smell the blood and offal from the morning's kills, can hear the casual conversation of spectators who have seen this so many times it no longer holds their full attention. She can see the other condemned being let out behind her. 7 men and 3 women, all scheduled to die in the next hour through methods designed not merely to kill, but to entertain. She does not yet know which method has been assigned to her. The magistrates who sentenced her did not specify. The arena officials who processed her this morning did not tell her she will learn what is about to happen to her body only when it begins happening. The arena master, a heavy-set man named Decimus Valerius Fessus, who has supervised these noon executions for 11 years, consults his wax tablet and gestures toward Aurelia. 2 attendants approach carrying something that glints in the Mediterranean sun. It takes her a moment to understand what she is seeing. A garment made of linen that has been soaked in pitch and oil, designed to be placed over her body and then ignited. The tuna molester, the troublesome shirt. She has heard of this punishment. Everyone in Rome has heard of it, but hearing about fire and feeling it approach your skin are different things entirely. What happens next in that arena, and what happened to thousands of other condemned prisoners across 4 centuries of Roman entertainment, is what tonight's video will reveal in detail. That no classroom ever taught you. What you are about to learn has been sanitized out of most historical education because the reality is too disturbing for general audiences. You know that Romans watched gladiators fight. You have seen the movies, the heroic combat, the dramatic thumbs up or thumbs down, the noble deaths of warriors who chose to fight. That version of Roman entertainment is real, but radically incomplete. The gladiatorial matches were the main event. But before the main event came the executions, the systematic killing of condemned prisoners using methods designed to maximize both suffering and spectacle. These executions were not hidden shameful necessities. They were entertainment. They were scheduled. They were advertised. They were popular. Tonight you will learn about 13 specific methods the Romans used to execute prisoners in the arena, methods that went far beyond simple killing into territory that modern forensic psychologists classify as ritualized torture, murder with mass participation. You will learn about the tuna molester, the burning garment that transformed condemned prisoners into living torches. While crowds watched and cheered, you We'll learn about the Decio ad Bestias, the condemnation to beasts that was not simply being thrown to lions, but an elaborate production involving dozens of animal species and staging designed to prolong death. You will learn about the Ludi Meridiani, the noon executions, where prisoners were forced to kill each other in combat with no armor and no possibility of survival. You will learn about the mythological executions, the theatrical productions where condemned prisoners were forced to act out fatal myths, actually dying as Icarus fell from artificial wings, actually being torn apart as Orpheus was dismembered by Maeads, actually being violated as Pasiphae was mounted by the bull. Subscribe if you want to understand what Roman civilization actually looked like behind the marble facades and philosophical treatises. Comment below telling me where in the world you are watching from, because Aurelia is standing in that arena with the pitch-soaked garment approaching her body, and I am going to tell you exactly what happened next and what happened to thousands of others who died in ways that the Roman crowds considered appropriate entertainment for an afternoon at the games. Let us begin with the flames. The burning garment was not a quick death. It was designed to be slow, to be visible, to be theatrical in ways that satisfied audiences who had grown sophisticated in their tastes for suffering. The tunic itself was constructed from cheap linen, the kind used for slaves' clothing, soaked thoroughly in pitch, resin, and animal fat. When ignited, this combination burned slowly rather than flash, combusting, producing flames that consumed the victim over a period of 10 to 15 minutes rather than killing through shock within seconds. The condemned prisoner was dressed in the tunic while it was still unlit, pulled over the head, tied at the waist to prevent removal, sometimes secured at wrists and ankles to posts that would hold the victim upright as the flames did their work. The ignition was itself theatrical. Attendants approached with torches from multiple directions, lighting the garment at several points simultaneously, so the flames would spread evenly. Aurelia Tersa experienced this process on an afternoon in approximately 115 of the Common Era during the reign of Trajan. The administrative records that survive from this period, fragments preserved in later compilations, describe her case in clinical terms. Aurelia Tertia, freed woman convicted of beneficentium against Claudia Marcella, wife of Gas Patronius Arbiter, sentenced to arena execution. Method assigned, Cassio Partunicum. Execution confirmed by arena physician. At the 7th hour, the record does not describe her screaming. It does not describe the smell of burning flesh that witnesses reported could reach the upper tiers of the amphitheater. It does not describe how long she remained conscious as the flames consumed her, though medical experts who have analyzed these execution methods estimate that victims remained aware for between 3 and 8 minutes depending on how the flames spread. What the record does note is that her execution was well received by the crowd, a notation that appears frequently in arena administration documents, indicating that the death had provided satisfactory entertainment value. The philosopher Seneca, writing approximately 60 years before Aurelia's Death described the noon executions he witnessed. I happened to return home at midday, expecting rest and relaxation after the morning's entertainments. Instead, I found something quite different. The morning fights had been merciful by comparison. Now all pretense was stripped away. The men had no armor. Their bodies were completely exposed to every blow. The crowd preferred this to the regular matches, and why not? There was no helmet to deflect the sword, no shield to block the thrust. Who needs skill when you have condemned criminals killing each other? Seneca was describing the combat executions, but his observations about crowd preferences apply equally to the burning. The Romans had developed tastes for death that was visible, prolonged, and unobstructed by the protections that made gladiatorial combat survivable. The tuna molesta was used not only in arenas but also in private spectacles hosted by emperors. Nero famously used condemned Christians as human torches to illuminate his gardens during evening parties, the burning garments providing light by which guests could dine and socialize. Tacitus describes one such evening. To suppress this rumor, Nero fabricated scapegoats and punished with every refinement the notoriously depraved Christians. Their deaths were made farcical, dressed in wild animal skins. They were torn to pieces by dogs, or crucified, or made into torches to be ignited after dark as substitutes for daylight. Nero provided his gardens for the spectacle and exhibited displays in the circus, mixing with the crowd, or mounted on a chariot dressed as a charioteer. The Christians, dying as human torches, were experiencing the same method applied to Aurelia Tertia. The slow combustion of the pitch-soaked garment, the prolonged consciousness, the theatrical presentation of suffering as entertainment. Modern burn specialists who have analyzed Roman execution methods estimate that approximately 70% of tuna molesta victims died from shock and fluid loss rather than direct flame damage, their bodies shutting down from the trauma before the fire could complete its work. The remaining 30% died from asphyxiation as the flames consumed the oxygen around their faces, or from organ failure as their core temperature rose beyond survivable levels. None of these deaths were quick. All of them were public, and all of them were considered appropriate entertainment for Roman citizens. Spending an afternoon at the games, condemnation to beasts was Rome's most famous arena execution. But what most people imagine when they hear this phrase is drastically simpler than the reality. The popular image is of prisoners being thrown to lions dying quickly in the jaws of predators. The actual practice was far more elaborate, involving multiple animal species, staged scenarios, and timing designed to extend death over significant periods. Man named Publius Aelius Fortunatus experienced this elaboration in approximately 177 of the Common Era. During the reign of Marcus Aurelius, he was 31 years old, a merchant convicted of fraud and theft against the imperial treasury, crimes that merited public execution rather than simple imprisonment. The administrative records describe his sentence. Publius Aelius Fortunatus, citizen convicted of peculates and furtum against the fiscus, sentenced to damnatio ad bestias in the Flavian amphitheater, animals assigned. Bears 3 leopards 2 wild dogs pack of 12 staging bound to stake with extended exposure intervals. The phrase extended exposure intervals reveals the essential cruelty of the method. Fortunatus was not thrown to animals and killed immediately. He was bound to a stake in the center of the arena, and animals were released one species at a time with intervals between releases that allowed the crowd to observe his injuries before the next assault began. The first release was the wild dogs, chosen because they tended to bite and tear at extremities rather than attacking vital organs. The dogs were trained to approach condemned prisoners and inflict damage without killing. Quickly, they targeted hands, feet, faces, areas that bled spectacularly but did not cause immediate death. After approximately 15 minutes, the dogs were recalled and Fortunatus was left bleeding and exposed while attendants repositioned the staging for the next phase. The crowd used this interval to comment on his injuries, to place bets on how long he would survive, to eat and drink and socialize. The leopards came next. Unlike the dogs, leopards typically attacked with killing intent. But a prisoner already weakened by loss and shock was less able to trigger the predatory response that led to quick killing bites. The leopards circled, struck, withdrew, struck again. The attacks continued for approximately 20 minutes before the leopards were recalled. The bears were saved for the final phase. By the time they were released, Fortunatus had been in the arena for over an hour, had lost significant blood, and was barely conscious. The bears' attacks were the most violent, but also the most merciful. Their massive size and strength meant they were capable of killing even weakened prey relatively quickly. Fortunat, approximately 90 minutes after entering the arena, his death was recorded as satisfactory in the administrative records, meaning the crowd had been entertained. The execution had proceeded according to schedule and no disruptions had occurred. The physician Galen, who witnessed numerous arena executions during his time in Rome, described the medical realities. The beasts do not kill cleanly as soldiers do. They tear and rend without purpose, damaging flesh in ways that cause maximum bleeding without immediately fatal injury. I have seen men survive the first assault and the second and sometimes the third, their bodies accumulating injuries that would each be survivable alone, but which together exceed what the human frame can endure. The death comes from exhaustion as much as from any single wound. The body simply ceases to function under the accumulated damage. Different animal species were assigned to different categories of criminals. Lions were typically reserved for the most serious offenses: treason, parasite, crimes that offended Roman sensibilities at the deepest level. Bears and leopards were assigned to serious but less symbolic crimes. Dogs and wild boars were used for lesser offenses or for prisoners who were being executed in groups. The staging was equally variable. Some prisoners were bound to stakes, as Fortunatus was. Some were placed on elevated platforms that animals had to climb to reach. Some were given ineffective weapons, wooden swords, broken spears that provided the illusion of combat while ensuring the prisoner could not actually defend themselves. Some were dressed in costumes that made them represent mythological figures or enemies of Rome. The numbers were staggering during the inaugural games of the Colosseum and 80 of the Common Era, approximately 9,000 animals were killed over 100 days of entertainment. Many of these animals were killed by professional hunters in mourning spectacles, but a significant portion were used in executions that could consume dozens of animals per condemned prisoner, depending on how elaborate the staging was designed to be. The noon executions occupied a specific slot in the arena schedule. After the morning animal hunts before the afternoon gladiatorial matches, this was considered the least prestigious time period, when many spectators left to eat lunch and only the most dedicated remained to watch. But those who remained saw something different from the main events. They saw condemned prisoners forced to kill each other with no armor, no training, and no possibility of survival. A woman named Laenia Sabina was scheduled for the noon executions in approximately 143 of the Common Era. She was 26 years old, slave convicted of murdering her owner during an attempted escape. The penalty for slaves who killed their masters was death, but not simple death, exemplary death, death that would remind other slaves of the consequences of resistance. The Ludi Meridiani followed a simple format. Condemned prisoners were paired against each other. Both were given weapons, usually swords, sometimes spears or clubs, but neither was given armor, shields, or any protective equipment. They were required to fight until one of them was dead. Survivor was then immediately paired against another condemned prisoner, fighting again until death occurred. Process continued until all scheduled prisoners had been killed. The administrative record for Laenia Sabina's execution reads: Laenia Sabina, slave of Marcus Aurelius Carta, convicted of homicidium of her master, sentenced to Ludi Meridiani, paired first against Gas Vitius, convicted of latrocinium, whom she killed after 4 minutes of combat, paired second against Sextus Pomponius, convicted of peculates, by whom she was killed after 7 minutes of combat, body confirmed by arena physician disposal standard. The dry administrative language conceals what actually happened. Licinia was forced to kill another human being, a man she did not know, who had committed property crimes unrelated to violence, using a sword she had never been trained to use. After killing him while still covered in his blood, while still processing the trauma of having ended a human life, she was immediately confronted by another condemned prisoner who killed her in turn. Seneca's description of these noon executions remains the most vivid. Ancient account: in the morning men are thrown to lions and bears, at noon they are thrown to the spectators themselves. The crowd demands that the slayer be thrown to those who in turn will slay him, and they detain the victor for another slaughter. The outcome for the combatants is always death. Fire and sword are used to drive the combatants together. This goes on while the arena is empty of spectators. But one of them was a highway robber. He killed a man. What of it? Because he killed, he deserved this punishment. But what have you done, poor wretch, that you should deserve to watch it? The phrase fire and sword are used to drive the combatants together reveals a crucial detail: condemned prisoners who refused to fight, who tried to surrender, who tried to run, who simply stood passively, were forced into combat by arena attendants armed with hot irons and whips. There was no escape through passivity. The only escape was death, and death could only come through combat. The psychological dimension of this execution method was as deliberate as the physical. The condemned were forced to become killers before they became victims. They were forced to participate in their own dehumanization, to shed blood with their own hands before their own blood was shed. The arena transformed them from condemned criminals into executioners, then back into condemned criminals, in a cycle that continued until everyone scheduled for the noon slot was dead. Modern psychologists who have analyzed the bloody meridian recognize it as a form of what is now called participation in atrocity, forcing victims to become perpetrators as a method of psychological destruction that compounds physical death with moral contamination. The numbers for noon executions are less well documented than other arena activities because the Romans themselves considered this time period less important, but estimates based on arena schedules suggest that a typical day of games might execute between 10 and 30 prisoners during the noon period alone. Across the empire, across centuries, the total may have reached hundreds of thousands of people forced to kill each other for the entertainment of those who watched. The Romans called them ludi fatales, or fatal charades, theatrical productions in which condemned prisoners were forced to act out scenes from mythology, with the crucial difference that the deaths portrayed were real. A man named Marcus Ulpius Stephanus experienced this form of execution in approximately 98 of the Common Era during the reign of Nerva. He was 28 years old, a freedman convicted of theft from a temple, a crime classified as sacrilege that merited particularly elaborate punishment. The myth assigned to him was the story of Orpheus, the legendary musician who descended to the underworld to rescue his wife and was later torn apart by Maiads, the frenzied female followers of Dionysus. The staging was elaborate. A backdrop had been constructed to represent a forest scene. Musicians played instruments that evoked the legendary music of Orpheus. Stephanus was dressed in a costume that identified him as the mythological figure, a lyre strapped to his back, a laurel crown on his head, robes that made him look like a poet. From legend, the animals that would represent the main ads were not released immediately. First, Stephanus was required to perform, to pretend to play the lyre, to enact scenes from the Orpheus legend, to provide the theatrical prelude that the crowd expected before the fatal conclusion. Only after the theatrical portion was complete did the arena attendants release the bear that had been trained to attack human figures. The poet Martial, who witnessed numerous mythological executions during his time in Rome, described several in his epics. What before was performed in myth is now performed in the arena. Pasiphae really did mate with a diction bull, believe We have seen it. Antiquity should not be incredulous any longer. The arena makes real whatever fame has sung. Elus, hanging on no pretend cross, gave up his vitals to a Caledonian bear. His lacerated limbs lived on, dripping gore. And in all his body, there was no body left. The reference to Elorius describes another mythological execution, this one reenacting the death of a legendary bandit who was crucified and then torn apart by wild animals. The condemned prisoner was actually crucified on a cross constructed for the arena and then actually torn apart by a bear while still alive on the cross. The passive reference describes what was considered the most disturbing of the mythological executions, the reenactment of the myth in which Queen Passé mated with a bull and conceived the Minotaur. In the arena version, condemned women were placed in wooden devices designed to facilitate actual coupling with bulls. Whether the women survived this assault varied. The purpose was the spectacle rather than the specific outcome. A woman named Volumnia Sithus was subjected to this execution in approximately 112 of the Common Era. She was 34 years old, convicted of adultery with a senator, a case that had political dimensions beyond the personal. The passive execution was assigned specifically because the adultery charge made the sexual nature of the death seem fitting to Roman sensibilities. The administrative record notitia. Cytheris freed woman convicted of adultery with Senator Gnaeus Cornelius, pure sentenced to mythological execution, as Pasiphae device constructed according to specifications. Bull provided by the imperial stables. Execution completed at the 4th hour. Body disposed according to standard procedures. The record does note whether she survived the assault by the bull, whether she died during the process or afterward, or how long the spectacle lasted. These details were apparently not considered worthy of administrative documentation. Modern historians estimate that mythological executions represented approximately 15 to 20% of arena deaths during the imperial period. The theatrical nature made them expensive to stage, requiring props, costumes, trained animals, and careful choreography, which meant they were typically reserved for major games rather than routine entertainment. But during major festivals, multiple mythological executions might be staged in a single day, each depicting a different fatal myth, each killing a real person in a role they had not chosen. The myths selected for arena execution were always those involving violent death: Icarus falling from the sky, prisoners thrown from heights, Hercules burning on his funeral, prisoners burned alive in staged funeral scenes, Prometheus devoured by eagles, prisoners tied to rocks while trained birds attacked them, Addis castrating himself, prisoners forced to undergo emasculation before death. Each of these deaths happened to real people. Each was considered appropriate entertainment for Roman audiences. Each was documented in administrative records that noted completion times and crowd reception, but rarely mentioned the suffering of the condemned. The burning at the stake was distinct from the tuna molesta in method and duration, where the burning garment killed through fire spreading across the body. The crematio killed through sustained exposure to flames that approached the body from below. Man named Lucius Varius Ambustus experienced this execution in approximately 203 of the Common Era. During the reign of Septimius Says, he was 41 years old, a Roman citizen, convicted of arson that had killed multiple people, a crime that Roman law considered particularly appropriate for death by fire. The staging for crematio was standardized by the imperial period. The condemned was bound to a wooden stake set in the center of the arena. Floor, combustible materials, wood, straw, dried brush were piled around the base of the stake, reaching approximately to waist height. Materials were ignited, and the condemned died as the flames rose to consume first their lower body, then their torso, then finally their head and face. The duration of this death was longer than the tuna molester estimates based on witness accounts suggest between 20 and 45 minutes from ignition to death, depending on how the materials were arranged and how quickly the flames spread. The administrative record for Lucius Varius Ambustus reads, Lucius Varius Ambustus, citizen, convicted of incendium with homicidium, sentenced to crematio in the Flavian amphitheater. Execution commenced at the 6th hour. Death confirmed at the 7th hour minus 1/4, crowd reception positive. Body disposed by fire completion. Notation death confirmed at the 7th hour. -1/4 indicates that Ambustus took approximately 45 minutes to die from the time the flames were ignited. For 45 minutes he burned in the center of the Colosseum while crowds watched. Witness accounts from various periods describe what this death looked like. The flames rise slowly at first, licking at the legs while the condemned screams and struggles against bonds that cannot be broken. The skin blackens and splits. The fat beneath the skin melts and feeds the fire, making the flames burn brighter. The screaming continues until the smoke grows thick enough to choke, or until the flames reach high enough to sear the throat and lungs. Some die from the smoke, some die from the fire, all die slowly, and all die in full view of those who have paid to watch. Medical experts who have analyzed death by burning estimate that consciousness is typically maintained until the flames reach the chest and begin affecting respiration. This means that victims of crematio were likely aware and suffering for between 15 and 30 minutes before losing consciousness, a duration that the Roman crowds apparently found appropriately entertaining. The crematio was used for specific categories of crimes, arson as in Ambustus' case, certain forms of treason, some religious offenses, and occasionally for criminals whose other offenses were considered less serious but who were being used to fill out a schedule of entertainment. During periods of Christian persecution, crematio was a common method for executing believers who refused to sacrifice to Roman gods. The numbers are difficult to estimate because crematio was often combined with other execution methods in a single day of games, but records from provincial amphitheaters suggest that burning executions might constitute between 5 and 15% of total arena deaths, with higher percentages during periods of religious persecution, when Christians and other minority Groups were being executed in large numbers. The elephant execution was considered a mark of particular imperial displeasure reserved for criminals whose offenses had personally insulted the emperor or whose deaths the emperor wished to witness personally. A woman named Flavia de Matula experienced this execution in approximately 95 of the Common Era during the reign of Domitian. She was approximately 30 years old, a member of the imperial family itself, niece of the emperor Vespasian and first cousin of Domitian. Her crime was conversion to Judaism or Christianity. The sources are unclear which Domitian